Every morning I get up at the crack of dawn. It's a lifelong habit that I can't get rid of even at 75. Today is no exception. The first rays of sunlight through the blinds and I'm on my feet. My joints creak like unlubricated hinges, but I still have to get out of bed. The house won't take care of itself, at least not the way I need it to. I look out the window of my second floor bedroom. From here I have a view of Tampa Bay, especially beautiful in the morning hours when the water is tinged pink. St. Petersburg has never been a bustling town, but in the last 20 years it has changed beyond recognition. When I built this house 43 years ago, there were only a few buildings around, mostly one-story houses. Now I am surrounded by modern cottages with flat roofs and a minimalism I don't understand. My house, a white two-story colonial-style mansion, looks like a dinosaur among them. But it is my dinosaur, and I am proud of every nail, every board in it. I personally designed and partially built it when I was full-time and working as a lead engineer for Sunset Construction. My Elizabeth lived here for 42 years, and our son Randall was born and raised here. After a shower, I go down to the kitchen. The large room with oak cabinets and a spacious dining area is now empty. My sister-in-law Vanity considers this kitchen hopelessly outdated and reminds me every chance she gets that granite countertops are last century. Her words are another thorn in my heart. Every time she criticizes my home, I remember how Elizabeth personally chose those countertops, how her eyes lit up when she first saw the finished kitchen. Over breakfast, soft-boiled eggs and peanut butter toast, I run my eyes over the local newspaper. Nothing new. Incidents, weather, politics. At times I catch myself thinking that I recognize fewer and fewer names in the news column. The world is slowly drifting away from me, or I from it. It doesn't make much difference. At 10 o'clock I hear the sound of the front door opening. Randall and Vanity. They have the keys, though I'm wondering more and more if I should take them back. They make it their duty to visit me twice a week, supposedly out of concern. But I wasn't born yesterday. Good morning, Father. Randall comes in first. At 52, he looks exactly like me at that age, the same deep-set gray eyes, the same straight hunched nose. Only his gaze lacks the hardness I saw in the mirror. My son has always been soft, too compliant. He didn't become a yoga instructor by accident. It's the perfect profession for someone who avoids conflict. Hello, Randall, I nod, then turn to his wife. Vanity. She gives me her standard smile, flawless and as cold as her artificial nails. Vanity is a woman who knows exactly what she wants. Unfortunately, her wish list includes my home. How are you feeling today, Eustace? She asks, looking around the kitchen with poorly concealed disapproval. The usual. Alive, well, sane. I see her faintly wrinkle her nose. The last part of my answer is a stone in her garden. 3 months ago, Vanity hinted to Randall, loud enough for me to hear from the next room, that maybe we should check to see if your father's memory is okay. What they don't know is that I can hear perfectly well, even through walls. Another advantage of having a house built of my own design, I know exactly where sound travels best. Hutchinum, I made you some chicken salad. Vanity puts the container on the table. You must eat properly at your age. Thank you, I reply dryly, knowing the salad will go in the trash as soon as they leave. I tasted her cooking once, a tasteless mass with a taste of plastic. Elizabeth would roll over in her grave if she knew they called it food in her house. While Randall inspects the leaky faucet in the bathroom, a problem I deliberately mentioned to keep him busy, Vanity discreetly inquires about my future plans. You know, Eustace, this house requires constant upkeep. It must be exhausting for you. I can manage, I cut him off. I built it with my own hands so I can maintain it. Sure, sure, she nods, but Randall and I are always ready to help. You know you can count on us if anything happens. I know what I can count on. They'll take my house the first chance they get. Vanity works as a real estate agent and knows exactly how much a lot overlooking the bay is worth. At today's prices, it's over $2 million, enough money to show care for an elderly father-in-law. After they leave, I go up to my office on the second floor. It's the only room in the house where I don't let anyone in. It's where I keep my drawings and documents, where I spend most of my day. At the massive oak desk, I feel safe. Dozens of pictures of Elizabeth stare back at me from the walls, reminding me of happy years. For the past 3 months, my tranquility has been disturbed by a new interior element. Hidden in the bookcase behind a volume of engineering mechanics is a small recorder the size of a deck of cards. I bought it at an electronics store after accidentally overhearing a conversation between Vanity and her sister. They were discussing how the old man is becoming increasingly inadequate and that we need to do something about it before he does something stupid with the will. The recorder is my insurance policy. It is voice activated and records conversations in the office when I'm not home. I'm not proud of this measure, but sometimes self-preservation is more important than pride. Elizabeth would call me paranoid, but Elizabeth is gone, and I have to protect what's left of our life together. Today I decide to check the tapes. I turn on the device, listen to scraps of conversations. Most of it is nothing special, but one recording from 3 days ago catches my attention. Waiting too long, Vanity's voice sounds muffled but distinct. He's 75, Randall. At his age, a lot of people are already in nursing homes. He's my father. The son's voice sounds unsure. I can't just. No one says just, but think about the future. This house is worth a fortune, and we're living in a rented apartment. It doesn't make sense. You're probably right, but there's no buts. We deserve better, and I'm tired of waiting. The recording cuts off, but I've had enough. With trembling fingers, I turn off the recorder. What I've suspected for years is now confirmed. They're waiting for me to die, or worse, ready to speed things up. There's a sudden heaviness in my chest. It's light at first, then stronger and stronger, as if someone had placed a slab of concrete on my ribs. I try to get up, but my legs give out. The room starts to spin, and I can't get enough air. My heart. It's been racing for the past year, but never this bad. I slide off the chair onto the floor, trying to breathe deeply. My phone. Where's my phone? I fumble for it in my shirt pocket, but my fingers won't listen. The pain intensifies, becomes unbearable. Dark circles floating in front of my eyes. Gathering the last of my strength, I finally unlock the screen and dial 911. The dispatcher asks something, and I struggle to pronounce the address. In between waves of pain, I think about the voice recorder. If something happens to me, Randall and Vanity will be here first. They'll find it, destroy the recording. No, we can't let that happen. With an inhuman effort, I rise to my feet, grab the edge of the desk. The tape recorder. We have to hide the recorder. There's a safe behind the seascape painting that no one knows about, not even Randall. I installed it myself when I built the house, carefully hidden behind a false wall. I walk over to the painting and push it away with shaky hands. I dial the combination on the old-fashioned mechanical lock. Elizabeth's date of birth. The safe opens. Inside are the most valuable documents, including the original title to the house, a few photographs, and a small box of Elizabeth's jewelry that I couldn't give away after her death. I put the recorder in the safe, close the door. Combination. I have to turn the wheel. My fingers won't listen. The pain is unbearable. Finally, the lock clicks. The painting is back where it belongs. The last thing I remember before I pass out is the wail of the ambulance siren in the driveway, and the thought that Elizabeth might be waiting for me on the other side. But I'm not ready to meet her yet. I have unfinished business. The white ceiling of the hospital room is the first thing I see when I regain consciousness. Sterile, impersonal, like a page on which nothing has been written yet, or a page that's been erased. The second thing I realized was the pain. Dull, aching, spilling across my chest. "Mr. Hampshire, can you hear me?" A young nurse leaned over me, checking my vitals. "You're at St. Anthony's. You've had a heart attack." My throat was dry, and it took me a few tries to speak. "How bad?" "Dr. Kavanaugh will be here shortly to explain," she said evasively, adjusting the IV. "In the meantime, rest." Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. Too many thoughts were swirling in my head. The house was left unattended. The recorder in the safe. Randall and Vanity must know about my hospitalization by now. Dr. Kavanaugh, a short man with a streak in his dark hair, showed up a half-hour later. After examining me and reviewing the monitors, he sat down on the edge of the bed. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Hampshire," he said gravely. "We wouldn't be having this conversation for a moment. Acute myocardial infarction, simply put, a massive heart attack." "When can I go home?" was the only thing I cared about. The doctor chuckled. Not for another week at the earliest. And that's if everything's all right. You need to take care of yourself, Mr. Hampshire. A week. A whole week inside these walls while Randall and Vanity walk freely through my house. The thought made my heart clench again, and the monitor beside me beeped alarmingly. You see, the doctor shook his head. Even the thought of discharge is stressful. Get some rest, Mr. Hampshire. Your family's on their way. Family. A word that used to warm the soul, but now caused only bitterness. Staring out the window at the gray sky of St. Petersburg, I sank into my memories. Randall was born when I was 23 years old. Elizabeth and I were young, full of hope. I was working then as a simple engineer, just beginning my career. We lived in a small rented apartment, and I dreamed of one day building a real house for my family. Randall was a quiet child, too quiet at times. Elizabeth worried that something was wrong with him, but the pediatrician assured the boy was just thoughtful. Not all children should be hyperactive. At school, he preferred books to playing with other kids. He did well, especially in the humanities. I hoped that he would follow in my footsteps, choose a technical specialty, but Randall gravitated toward philosophy and psychology. When he turned 15, we finally moved into our new house, the one I had designed and partially built myself. Elizabeth was delighted, calling it a palace by the sea. Randall, on the other hand, was indifferent. It's too big, he said then. We don't need that much room. I brushed it off. Teenagers are always dissatisfied with everything. After college, Randall went to the West Coast to find himself, as he put it. He sent postcards from different cities and occasionally called. Elizabeth missed him, but I thought the boy needed to grow up, become independent. Vanity came into his life when Randall was 36. By then, he was back in St. Petersburg, teaching yoga at a local fitness center, living in a rented studio. Elizabeth was already starting to get sick, the first signs of multiple sclerosis, though we didn't know the diagnosis at the time. Vanity came to his class, and 2 months later they were living together. A beautiful, confident woman with ambition and clear goals. The exact opposite of our dreamy Randall. She worked as a real estate agent for Prime Estate and had a reputation for selling anything to anyone. Elizabeth immediately disliked her. All I see in her eyes are dollars, she told me after I first met her. I brushed it off, thinking my wife was just jealous of her son. Now I realize Elizabeth was right all along. She's always been a better judge of character. The wedding was modest, almost hasty. Elizabeth was already getting around in a wheelchair, and Vanity did her best to keep the ceremony to a minimum. Out of convenience to your wife, she explained to me. But I saw her wrinkle her nose whenever Elizabeth tried to participate in the planning. After the wedding, their visits became regular. First once a week, then more often. As Elizabeth's illness progressed, they had to help with her care. Or should I say, Randall had to. Vanity always found an excuse to leave early or not come at all. When Elizabeth was gone 4 years ago, something in me died too. The house that had once seemed cozy became an empty shell, and that's when Vanity began the moving campaign, as I mentally called it. First, there were innocent remarks about how hard it was for me to be alone in such a big house. Then suggestions that I move in with them as soon as they found a bigger apartment. Then hints that I could move into a nursing home and give the house to them, to keep it in the family. I resisted. This house was the last thing that connected me to Elizabeth. Every corner held memories of her. Plus, I was well aware that Vanity wasn't planning to live in it. She wanted to sell it. Real estate prices in our neighborhood had skyrocketed, especially for lots by the water. A noise in the hallway brought me back to the present. Randall and Vanity. She came in first, impeccably dressed, with perfect makeup, as if she were going to a business meeting, not to the hospital to see her dying father-in-law. "Eustace!" she exclaimed with feigned concern. "We were so frightened when the hospital called. How are you feeling?" "Achum, alive, as you can see," I answered dryly. Randall came over to me and hesitantly took my hand. "Dad, what happened?" "The doctor said a heart attack." "Did you take your medication?" His concern seemed genuine, but I no longer trusted my own judgment when it came to my son. It was too painful to accept that my only child had betrayed me. "Don't worry, Randall. The doctor promises a full recovery." It was a lie. Dr. Kavanaugh was far less optimistic. but I didn't want to show weakness. Vanity fussed around, adjusting pillows, asking the nurse about the visiting schedule. To an outsider, she would have been the model of a caring daughter-in-law, but I could see her gaze sliding assessingly over the monitors, her eyes peering at the readings as if trying to determine how much time I had left. Fun. The doctor said you'll be here for at least a week, she said, taking a seat in the visitor's chair. Don't worry about the house. We'll take care of everything. I'll come by every day to make sure everything's all right. That won't be necessary, I objected. The house will be unattended for a week. You can't leave real estate unattended, she shook her head. You can't leave a property unattended. I noticed Randall cast a quick glance at her, a mixture of disapproval and humility. He could never stand up to his wife. They stayed for about an hour. Vanity talked more to the nursing staff than to me, finding out the details of my condition. Randall sat next to me, occasionally squeezing my hand and trying to make meaningless conversation about the weather and the latest news. When they finally left, I felt not relief but anxiety. What would they do in my house unattended? Would they find the safe? The recorder? Would they change anything while I was gone? The next few days blended into a monotonous series of procedures, examinations, and visits. Randall and Vanity came every day, always together. She brought home-cooked meals I'd barely tasted. He brought books I hadn't read. Their care seemed like a spectacle played out for the nurses. On my fourth day in the hospital, something happened that finally confirmed my suspicions. I woke up early, before rounds. The ward was in semi-darkness, and dawn was breaking outside the window. Voices in the hallway caught my attention, familiar voices, though muffled. Randall and Vanity. This early? Unusual. They were standing just outside my room door, apparently thinking I was still asleep. I propped myself up on my elbow and strained my hearing. So, it's worse than we thought. Vanity's voice sounded excited. I talked to Dr. Kavanaugh last night. His heart is badly damaged. He may not survive a second attack like that. Don't say that, Randall sounded worried. He'll be fine. Randall, be realistic. He's 75. He's had 2 heart attacks. We need to be prepared. Ready for what? There was a metal in my son's voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. Decision-making, of course. Someone will have to take responsibility for his welfare after he's discharged. He won't be able to live alone in that house. You'll have to get guardianship. I froze, afraid to move lest I miss a word. Guardianship, Randall interjected. You make it sound like he's incapacitated. It's my father, Vanity. He's perfectly sane. For now. But cognitive impairment is common after a seizure like this. What if he makes the wrong decision about the house? Think of what he's turned it into. All those antiquated systems, leaky faucets. The house is losing value every day. It's not the value of the house, Randall objected, but without his previous firmness. Of course it's not about the value, her voice softened. It's about its safety. You don't want him to fall down the stairs and lie there for hours until they find him, do you? There was a pause. I could practically picture Vanity putting her hand on her husband's shoulder, using her favorite gesture when she wanted to convince him of something. I talked to Alistair, Randall finally said. He's a good lawyer and an old friend of Dad's. He said it's almost impossible to get a guardianship without Dad's consent, unless a special committee declares him incompetent. And what would it take? There was a note in Vanity's voice I'd never heard before, a cold calculation. Vanity, Randall exclaimed indignantly. You're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything, she interrupted quickly. I just want to know all the options, in case your father really can't take care of himself. At that moment, a nurse appeared in the hallway, and the conversation was interrupted. Soon they entered the room, both with strained smiles. I pretended to be asleep, not ready to meet their gaze after what I had heard. Discharge day came on the 8th day. Dr. Kavanaugh took a long time to instruct me on medication, diet, and physical restrictions. I listened half-heartedly, thinking only of getting home as soon as possible to check on Randall and Vanity. Is your son or daughter-in-law coming to get you? The nurse asked as she helped me pack my things. Yes, they should, I answered, though my gut told me something was wrong. I called them yesterday to let them know I was discharged. Vanity said she'd pick me up at 2 in the afternoon. It was now 3:30, and there was no call or text from her. I dialed her number. Tone, then voicemail. Tried Randall's number, same thing. That's weird. Usually they always answered my calls, especially in the last week when they pretended to be caring relatives. Maybe they're on their way, the nurse suggested, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. By 4 o'clock, it was clear that no one was coming for me. I made a dozen more calls. No answer. The nurse offered to call a social worker, but I declined. I didn't want strangers interfering in my life. I'll call a cab, I said firmly, pulling out my phone. After all, I'm not an invalid. The nurse looked concerned but didn't argue. 20 minutes later, I was in a cab heading home. The driver, an elderly immigrant from Cuba, chattered all the way about politics and gas prices. I nodded without listening. My only concern was what I would find at home after a week's absence. When the cab turned onto my street, my heart beat faster. From afar, the house looked as usual, white walls, a neat lawn. But something was wrong, I could feel it. After paying the driver, I walked slowly to the front door, clutching my keys in my hand. When I got to the porch, I realized what had alerted me. There were lights on in the windows, even though it wasn't dark yet. And there were voices, lots of voices. I put the key in the lock and tried to turn it. To no avail. I tried again, thinking I had the wrong keyhole. Same result. The lock was different, completely different. At that moment, I realized why Vanity and Randall hadn't come for me. They didn't expect me to come home so soon. Or maybe they didn't expect me to come home at all. I stood in front of my own house, unable to believe what was happening. The lock had been replaced in my absence, without my permission. For a second, panic gripped me. I'm a helpless old man, just discharged from the hospital with no way to get into my own home. But the panic was quickly replaced by anger, burning and sobering. Stepping away from the door, I listened. There was music coming from the house, something modern with an annoying beat that Elizabeth would never tolerate in our home. I heard laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of many voices. A party? In my house? Carefully, trying to stay out of sight of the windows, I walked around the house to the right. My heart pounded, reminding me of the recent attack, but I ignored the pain. The side window of the living room overlooked a small front garden with the hibiscus bushes Elizabeth loved so much. Through them, I could watch what was happening inside while remaining unnoticed. What I saw made my blood boil. There were at least 20 people crowded into my living room, the room where Elizabeth's piano stood, where 3 generations of family photos were kept. Most of them were strangers to me, but I recognized a few as Vanity's relatives. Her sister Cassie and her husband, her parents Frank and Pamela, her cousin Jamie. In the center of the room, like a queen on a throne, sat Vanity. She wore a bright red dress that seemed defiantly out of place in the interior of my house. She held a glass of amber liquid, my collectible scotch that I kept for special occasions. Next to her stood Randall, pale with a strained smile. He looked like a man at his own funeral. "Welcome to our new home." Vanity's voice was loud enough for me to hear through the glass. She raised her glass. "To new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing, "To new beginnings." I watched these strangers drink my whiskey, sit on the couch I'd picked out with Elizabeth, touch the pictures of my family. Frank, Vanity's father, held a crystal vase, a wedding gift from Elizabeth's parents, and eyed it appraisingly. I saw his lips say, "Real crystal. Must be worth a lot." "Dad wants to show the house to his golf partners," Vanity said, stroking the arm of my chair. "They've been looking at lots in this neighborhood for a while." "We need to do some renovations first," Frank replied. "Everything's so outdated." "Sure," Vanity nodded. "We'll tear it all down and remodel it. An open floor plan, a modern kitchen, maybe even a pool in the backyard." They talked about my house like they already owned it. Like I didn't exist. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, my fingers trembling with impotent rage. I wanted to rush inside, to scream, to push them all out. But I knew I couldn't do it alone against 20. I had to be smarter than that. "What about the second floor?" Someone I couldn't see asked. "Oh, it's a treasure trove," Vanity smiled. 4 bedrooms, a study. I'll show you later. I want to turn the master bedroom into a real suite with a walk-in closet and a bath." Master bedroom. The room where Elizabeth and I spent 42 years together, where she died in my arms. I flinched away from the window, feeling like just a little more, and my heart wouldn't be able to take it. I needed to calm down, gather my thoughts. act methodically, as I always did in a crisis. My first impulse was to call the police. But what would I tell them? That my son and daughter-in-law were having a party in my house? They'd just say it was a family dispute. Besides, I had no proof that I owned the house. All the documents were kept inside in the safe. I looked around, trying to find a solution. My gaze fell on the back of the house where the old basement entrance was located. It was almost invisible behind the overgrown shrubs. I hadn't used it in a long time, preferring to go down to the basement from inside the house. But now it might be my salvation. Rounding the side of the house, I carefully pushed the bushes apart. The old wooden door, covered in peeling paint, looked abandoned. I doubted Vanity or Randall even knew it existed. This part of the property was rarely visited. And the basement itself was used mostly for storing building materials and garden tools. The door was locked with a simple padlock, the key to which was kept in the basement. Typical engineering error, but I had a contingency plan. There was always a duplicate under a large rock to the right of the door. My hands shook as I pushed the heavy stone away. Age and illness were taking their toll. Finally, the stone gave way, and I was relieved to see the key, rusty but still usable. Inserting the key into the lock, I turned it. The mechanism creaked, but it yielded. The door opened with a long creak that I hoped I couldn't hear in the house because of the loud music. Inside, the basement was dark and smelled damp. I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light picked out familiar shapes from the darkness. Tool racks, old paint cans, rolled up rolls of linoleum. Everything was in place, as if time had stopped here. I moved slowly, trying not to make any noise. The interior staircase to the house was in the far corner of the basement. As I climbed it, I found myself in front of the door leading to the storage room on the first floor. The voices and music were muffled but distinct. The party was in full swing. I turned the knob carefully and opened the door a little. The pantry was empty, the lights off. There were voices coming from the hallway, someone walking by, discussing the amazing view from the windows. I held my breath, waiting for the footsteps to die down. Slipping out of the pantry, I found myself in the hallway leading to the kitchen. To the right was the staircase to the second floor, where my office was. But to reach it, I had to cross a hallway, clearly visible from the living room. I pressed myself against the wall, contemplating a plan of action. There were too many people in the house to get up the main staircase unnoticed. But there was another way, through the kitchen to the back staircase for servants, which we never used. Elizabeth had insisted that it be preserved when the house was remodeled, considering it part of the building's historic character. The kitchen appeared to be littered with trays of food and drink. Two young men in uniforms, apparently hired waiters, were preparing cocktails at the counter. I lurked outside the door, waiting for them to turn away. When one of the waiters came out with a tray and the other bent down to pull something from a lower cabinet, I slipped through the kitchen to an inconspicuous door in the corner. Behind it was a narrow spiral staircase leading to the second floor. The steps creaked under my weight, and each creak echoed in my heart with an anxious jolt. If someone heard, if someone went to check. But luck was on my side. The stairs led me to a small hallway on the second floor from which I could easily reach my office. There were voices coming from the hallway downstairs. It sounded like Vanity was starting a tour of the guest house. "The upstairs rooms are marvelous," I heard her voice say. "Let me show you the master bedroom." The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me act faster. I slipped into my study and quietly closed the door behind me. It was dark inside. The curtains were drawn and the lights were off. I didn't turn it on for fear of attracting attention. The dim light from the window and the flashlight on my phone were enough. The office looked untouched. My desk, bookshelves, chair, everything in its place. But something wasn't right. I looked around more closely and noticed desk drawers pulled out. Some of the folders on the shelves shifted. Someone had been poking around. My gaze fell on the wall where a painting of a seascape hung, hiding the safe. The painting was still there, but it was hanging a little crooked. Someone had touched it. Fear gripped me. Had they found the safe? I went over to the painting and took it down. I was relieved to see that the safe had not been touched. The metal door was closed. Apparently, they were just examining the painting, not realizing what was behind it. There were voices outside the door. Vanity was giving a tour. I could hear her showing off the guest bedrooms, talking about the renovation plans. They were approaching the study. And here's my father-in-law's office. Vanity's voice came from just outside the door. Nothing fancy, old-fashioned furniture. I think we'll turn it into a home theater. The doorknob started to turn. I froze, not knowing where to hide. There were no hiding places in the office except for the massive desk, but it wouldn't hide me completely. You shouldn't go in there, Randall's voice came suddenly. Dad always locked the study when he left. There might be important documents in there. What kind of papers? Vanity sounded annoyed. He's in the hospital, and he's not likely to be back anytime soon. Besides, this is our house now. Anyway, let's show the bedrooms first, Randall insisted. We can see the study later. A pause. I held my breath. Huh. Okay, Vanity finally agreed. Come on, I'll show you the master bedroom. It's got a spectacular view of the bay. The footsteps drifted away. I exhaled, feeling the sweat running down my back. Randall had just, unknowingly, saved me from detection. Maybe he still had a shred of conscience left in him. Wasting no time, I turned to the safe. I dialed the combination, Elizabeth's date of birth, and heard a click. The door opened. Everything was there. The original title to the house, my will, insurance papers, old photos I didn't want to show anyone, Elizabeth's jewelry box, and, most importantly, the tape recorder. I picked up the recorder, weighing it in my hand, the little device that could change everything. Proof of betrayal, a trump card up my sleeve. I turned it on for a second, checking to see if it worked. The indicator light turned green. The battery was still holding. Voices came from the corridor again. The guests were returning. I quickly put the recorder in my pocket, then took out the certificate of ownership and insurance from the safe. I might need those documents if it came to a legal confrontation. After closing the safe and hanging the painting back up, I looked around for a place to hide. But there was no way out. Sooner or later, they would come in here and find me. I had to act decisively. I was about to leave the office and go down the back stairs, but I heard footsteps in the corridor. Someone was approaching the door. I froze, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The door opened and Randall's figure appeared in the doorway. He flicked a switch and the office was flooded with bright light. Our eyes met. There was shock on his face mixed with guilt and fear. Dad? He breathed out, pale. You? How did you get here? I straightened, looking my son straight in the eye. There's always an entrance to my own house, I answered, feeling strangely calm. What are you doing here, throwing parties while I'm gone and changing locks? Randall backed away as if I'd hit him. It wasn't me, Dad, he whispered. It was Vanity. She said, she convinced me it was best for you, that you agreed to move into a nursing home after the hospital. And you believed her? My voice was quiet but firm. Or did you choose to believe it because it was more convenient? He opened his mouth to answer, but that's when Vanity's voice came from the hallway. Randall, where are you? Everyone's waiting downstairs. My son looked back at the door in panic, then back at me. What's going to happen now? He asked, a childish fear in his voice, as if he were 10 years old again and had broken a window with a baseball. I took the tape recorder out of my pocket and showed it to Randall. Now, son, I said, feeling a rush of energy I hadn't felt in years, I'm going to go downstairs and show everyone who the real owner of this house is. Randall looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. His face had turned so pale that the freckles on the bridge of his nose looked like splashes of rust on a white wall. Dad, wait! He took a step toward me, rubbing his hands together nervously, a gesture he'd learned from me as a child. Let's talk first. I can explain. Randall. Vanity's voice sounded impatient in the hallway. What are you doing out there? I could see the panic in my son's eyes. He was torn between loyalty to his wife and fear of me. At another time, I might have sympathized with him, but there was no room for pity now. Go, I said quietly. Tell her you're coming down, but know that I'll be in the living room in 10 minutes, and you'd better be ready for whatever happens. Randall hesitated, opening and closing his mouth like a beached fish. Then he nodded and hurried out of the office, closing the door tightly behind him. As soon as the footsteps died away, I returned to the safe. Now that the light was on, I could examine its contents more carefully. I already had the recorder in my hand, a small black device with record and play buttons. But I needed more. Inside the safe, in addition to the house deeds I'd already retrieved, was a thick leather folder. I knew it contained evidence of years of machinations by Frank Porter, Vanity's father. Early in my career, when I first came to Sunset Construction, Frank had been one of the heads of the purchasing department. He used his position to organize a kickback scheme with suppliers that caused the company to lose millions. I accidentally discovered the discrepancies in the paperwork and did my own investigation. But instead of reporting it to my superiors, I decided to talk to Frank directly. He begged me to keep it a secret, swore he'd never. As a young and naive man, I agreed, taking him to promise to pay damages and resign of his own accord. But I kept copies of the documents just in case. And now, 40 years later, that just in case came. I opened the folder, running my eyes over the yellowed pages. Forged invoices, double bookkeeping, letters with explicit innuendo. It was all there. Frank had long since become a successful businessman, owner of a chain of building material stores. His reputation was impeccable. Until now. Placing the folder on the desk, I picked up the recorder and pressed the play button. A few seconds of hissing, then voices Vanity and her sister Cassie. "It's just funny," Vanity said. "The old man is sitting in this huge house that cost a fortune, and we're squatting in a rented apartment." "But it's his house," Cassie's voice sounded unsure. "He built it." "So? He's 75, Cassie. What's the point of a house like that for one person? Besides, he's not fit to take care of it anymore. There are leaks everywhere. The wiring is outdated. It's just plain dangerous." "And what do you suggest?" A pause, then Vanity's chuckle, cold, calculating. "I have a plan. He's weakened now. His health is failing. Randall worries about him all the time. I convinced him that my father would be better off in a nursing home. There's medical supervision, companionship, and the house needs to be sold." "And he agreed?" "Not exactly, but he will soon. I found one place, Sunny Acres. It's not the most expensive, but it's pretty decent. The main thing is that it's covered by his insurance, so we won't have to spend any money." "What if he doesn't want to move?" Again the pause, longer. "There are ways, Cassie. He has memory lapses. He sometimes forgets where he put things. A couple more instances like that, documented by a doctor, and the custody issue could be raised officially." "Vanity!" Cassie's voice sounded shocked. "You can't be serious. It's Randall's father." "I'm totally serious. Randall and I have a right to a normal life. His father has lived in comfort enough. Now it's our turn. Besides, I've already got my eye on potential buyers' friends of Dad's. They're offering $2,150,000. Can you imagine what we could do with that kind of money? What about all of Eustace's things? The furniture, the pictures? We'll leave some of it to him, of course, but we'll sell most of it. He's got a whole collection of antiques just gathering dust. And that silver in the dining room could fetch 15 or 20,000 at least." "Does Randall know of these plans?" "Not in every detail." The same cold chuckle again. "He's too sentimental. Thinks we'll just help his father move to a place where he'll be more comfortable." "And about selling things?" "Well, you don't have to tell him everything at once. He'll get used to it." The recording was interrupted by noise, then voices again, but a different conversation, less interesting. I turned the recorder off, feeling my fingers shake, not with fear, with rage. They planned not just to take my house, but to erase all traces of my life here, my life with Elizabeth. Sell her silver, her piano, throw away our photographs. I slipped the recorder into my jacket pocket along with the deed to the house. I took the compromising material on Frank Porter too. It could be useful as additional leverage. I looked out into the hallway and made sure that no one was there. And then I left the office. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room. The party was still going on. I paused for a moment in front of the mirror in the hallway. The reflection showed a weary old man with sunken cheeks and inflamed eyes and the after effects of a hospital stay. But there was a fire in those eyes that I hadn't seen in years. I adjusted my shirt collar, smoothed my gray hair. If I'm going into battle, I want to look my best. Descending the stairs, I found myself in the hall. The guests were in the parlor. I could see them through the archway. Vanity was standing by the fireplace, talking excitedly. Randall was sitting on the sofa, nervously twirling a glass of whiskey. Frank Porter was in my chair, the same one I used to read in the evenings. No one noticed my appearance. I walked through the archway and stopped at the entrance to the living room. For a second, two, three, there was no silence, but gradually people began to notice me. Conversations died down, heads turned in my direction. Finally, there was complete silence. All eyes were fixed on me. Vanity froze half-heartedly. Her face had a look of astonishment that might have been comical in another situation. "Eustace," she finally squeezed out, "have you, have you checked out?" "As you can see," I answered calmly. But, but how did you get in?" Her gaze drifted to the front door. "The locks. Eichhornim. You can always find a way into my house," I repeated the phrase I told Randall upstairs, "especially if you built it." Randall rose from the couch, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Dad, I can explain." "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I already know everything. About your plans to send me to a nursing home. About selling the house to your father-in-law's friends. About how you were going to dispose of the things your mother and I had collected all our lives." Vanity quickly pulled herself together. Her face took on an expression of anxious concern, the mask I knew so well. "Eustace, you've got it all wrong." She took a step toward me. "We did discuss the possibility of moving, but only out of concern for you. After your heart attack, you need constant medical care, which we can't provide." "Really?" I smiled, pulling out my tape recorder. "Why don't we listen to what you told your sister? Cassie's here, I can see that." I nodded toward Vanity's sister, who was standing by the window with a glass in her hand. She turned pale as she met my gaze. "What's that?" Vanity frowned, looking at the recorder. "Insurance," and I answered. "Sonum, I suspected for a long time that you were up to something. And I was right." Without waiting for her reaction, I pressed the play button and turned the volume up to maximum. In the silence of the living room, Vanity's voice sounded especially clear. "He has memory lapses, sometimes forgetting where he put things. A couple more instances like that, documented by a doctor, and the custody issue could be raised officially." I saw Randall flinch at those words. His gaze flickered to his wife, shock in his eyes. Did he really not know what she was planning? Or did he simply not want to know, preferring to ignore the obvious? "And that silver in the dining room could fetch 15 or 20,000, no less." Vanity rushed toward me, trying to snatch the recorder. "Turn it off. Now!" I backed away, holding the device away from her. "Why? Aren't your guests curious to know what your plans are?" The room became so quiet you could hear the floor clock in the corner ticking. Everyone froze, looking at me and Vanity. "He's too sentimental. Thinks we'll just help his father move to a place where he'll be more comfortable. And about selling things. Well, you don't have to tell him everything at once. He'll get used to it." I turned off the tape and looked around the living room. Frank Porter looked as if he'd swallowed a lemon whole. Pamela, his wife, was nervously fiddling with the string of pearls around her neck. Cassie stared at the floor, hesitant to raise her eyes. "Now you know what Vanity was really planning," I said, addressing them all at once. "Not just to help the old man move to a more comfortable place, but to dump me in the cheapest nursing home, sell my house and all my stuff." "That's not true," Vanity tried to defend herself. "The tape was taken out of context. I was just discussing options." "Options for what?" Randall asked sharply, looking at his wife with a new expression. "How to deceive my father? How to make him appear incompetent to take the house?" "Randall, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." He turned away from her and looked at me. "Dad, I swear I didn't know about the plans. She only talked about you needing care after the hospital. Selling the house was out of the question." I nodded. Maybe he was telling the truth. But that didn't matter now. The important thing was to regain control of the situation. "I have something else for you, Frank." I turned to Father Vanity, pulling out a file folder. "Remember Sunset Construction, 43 years ago? Remember our arrangement?" Frank's face, already pale, turned ashy gray. He remembered. Of course he remembered. "I don't know what you mean," he mumbled, but his eyes flickered restlessly. "No? Then perhaps your business associates would be interested in the contents of this folder." I tapped my finger on the leather cover. "It's full documentation of your kickback scheme. Forged invoices, double bookkeeping, letters to suppliers, everything you need to destroy your reputation." "You wouldn't dare," he exhaled. "That was 40 years ago." Believe me, I would. My voice was quiet but firm. Sonaker, especially after I found out that you were going to buy my house at an undervalued price through a front man. You think I didn't guess who these friends were that Vanity was going to sell the house to? Frank was silent, staring at the floor. His wife nervously put her hand on his shoulder, as if trying to protect him. Now I want you all out of my house. I looked around the living room. This party's over. You can't just kick us out, Vanity objected. We have an agreement with Randall. You have no claim to this house. I pulled out the property certificate. I own it, individually. Randall is not a co-owner and never has been. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police and charge you with trespassing. There was silence. The guests began to look around awkwardly, many reaching for their bags and jackets. No one wanted to be at the center of a scandal. This isn't over, Vanity hissed, eyes flashing. You'll be sorry, old man. Maybe, I shrugged. But today you're the one who's going to regret it, and you can start by getting my house keys back. Vanity wanted to object, but Frank, suddenly regaining his senses, stood up abruptly. That's enough. He turned to his daughter. Give me the keys and let's get out of here. Now. His voice tolerated no objection. Vanity gave me one last, hateful glance, pulled a bunch of keys out of her purse, and tossed them on the coffee table. The guests hurried to the exit, avoiding eye contact with me. Within 5 minutes, the living room was empty. It was just me, Randall, and Vanity. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest, a grimace of rage on her face. Pack your things, I said, looking at my son. Anything that belongs to you personally. You have to leave the house tonight. Randall nodded without looking up. He looked broken, lost. Dad, I really didn't know, he began. Not now, Randall. I held up my hand, stopping him. I'm too angry to talk about it right now. Maybe later. Right now, just leave. You're going to regret this, Vanity repeated, grabbing her purse. No one treats my family like that. I didn't dignify her with an answer. Instead, I walked over to the chair by the fireplace, my chair, and sat down, squaring my shoulders. The master of the house returned to his rightful place. After Vanity and Randall went upstairs to pack, I was alone in the living room. The silence of the house, broken only by the ticking of the floor clock, was soothing. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart gradually return to its normal rhythm. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind fatigue, but also satisfaction. My attention was drawn to the mess left by the party. Glasses of whiskey, plates of appetizers, crumpled napkins. On my mahogany table, a prized possession I'd purchased at an auction 20 years ago, was a glass ring. Elizabeth would have been horrified by such treatment of antique furniture. Upstairs, cabinet doors slammed and muffled voices were heard. Vanity and Randall were arguing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was obvious: accusations, excuses, threats. Their family life was coming apart, and I was the cause of it. Or more accurately, the catalyst for the inevitable collapse. I stood up, walked over to the bar, and poured myself some whiskey. No more than a thimbleful, Dr. Kavanaugh had warned me about the incompatibility of alcohol with my medication. But tonight I deserved this little weakness. The amber liquid burned my throat, spread warmth through my body. The doorbell rang, interrupting my musings. I glanced at my watch. It was 8:30 p.m., a little late for a visit. Maybe one of the guests had forgotten an item, or neighbors concerned about the noise. When I opened the door, I saw two policemen, a middle-aged man with a tired face and a young woman with her brown hair in a tight bun. Mr. Hampshire? The older officer asked. Officer Donovan and Officer Ramirez. We received a report of possible trespassing in your home. I didn't immediately realize what it was about. Then I remembered my threat to call the police, but I didn't call them. I didn't have time. Then who did? We were called by Mr. Cormack, your neighbor, Officer Ramirez explained, as if she'd read my mind. He said he saw suspicious activity outside your house, and then a loud argument. Perkins Cormack is my neighbor on the right, a retired Marine and former Marine. We weren't close friends, but we maintained a good neighborly relationship. He must have noticed the unusual number of cars and people, and then heard the confrontation. May I come in? Donovan asked. We need to make sure everything is okay. I nodded and stepped back, letting them inside. In the hallway, the cop stopped, assessing the situation with a professional eye. The mess in the living room, the signs of a party, the irritated voices from upstairs, the picture clearly demanded an explanation. "What happened here, Mr. Hampshire?" Donovan asked. I briefly told them the situation, the heart attack, the hospitalization, how I'd come home to find the locks changed and a party going on in the house. Mentioned the tape recorder and the recorded conversation, but omitted the details about the compromising documents on Frank Porter. That was my personal insurance. "So your son and his wife changed the locks without your knowledge?" Ramirez clarified, making notes in her notebook. "And the house is in your name?" I showed her the title I still had in my pocket. Sole proprietorship, unencumbered. "I built this house 43 years ago, and it's always belonged to me." The officers looked at each other. The situation was clear. Trespassing, possibly even attempted real estate fraud. "Do you want to press charges, Mr. Hampshire?" Donovan asked. "Against your son and daughter-in-law?" I wondered. Did I want to? Part of me wanted revenge. Wanted to see Vanity led away in handcuffs, her smug face contorted with fear. But the other part, the part that remembered Randall as a little boy who'd come to me with broken knees and asked me to fix broken toys, was hesitant. At that moment, Randall and Vanity appeared on the stairs. They froze when they saw the police officers. Vanity's face turned pale and then covered with red spots. Randall just looked crushed. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. "The police," I answered. The neighbors called when they heard the noise. "Are you Mr. and Mrs. Hampshire?" Donovan addressed them. "We need to ask you a few questions. Your father claims you trespassed into his house and changed the locks." Vanity instantly pulled herself together. Her face took on an expression of outraged innocence. "Sorry, it's a misunderstanding, officer," she said softly. "My father-in-law was in the hospital after suffering a massive heart attack. The doctors said he couldn't live alone. We were just taking care of him, preparing the house for his return." "By changing the locks?" Donovan raised an eyebrow skeptically. "The old ones were faulty," Vanity said quickly. "We were afraid he might be in a dangerous situation if the locks jammed. Plus, there's been an increase in burglaries in the neighborhood." "And the party?" Ramirez interrupted her. "Mr. Hampshire claims you threw a party in his absence." "It was a family dinner." Vanity smiled her professional real estate agent smile. "My parents wanted to support us during a difficult time. We were all very worried about Eustace." I silently pulled out my voice recorder and turned on the playback. In the silence of the hall, Vanity's voice came through. "He has memory lapses. Sometimes he forgets where he put things. A couple more instances like that, documented by the doctor, and the custody issue could be raised officially." Randall's face contorted with pain, as if he had been struck. He looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Vanity," he whispered. "Is it true? Did you really want to—" "Randall, don't be naive," she interrupted sharply. "Your father is manipulating you. That tape could have been made at any time about anything. It's taken out of context." "The tape was made 3 days ago," I said calmly, "in my office. You were talking to your sister Cassie about how you were going to send me to the cheapest nursing home and sell my house and things." The police officers listened with professional attention. Officer Ramirez continued to take notes, occasionally glancing at Vanity, who increasingly resembled a cornered animal, dangerous in her desperation. "Mr. Hampshire," Donovan said at last, turning to me, "do you wish to press formal charges?" I looked at my son. There were tears in his eyes, not ostentatious tears, real tears. He looked like a man who had been robbed of the ground beneath his feet. I realized that he really didn't know the full extent of his wife's plans. Perhaps he suspected it, but he kept it out of his mind, preferring to believe the best. "No," I finally answered. "I don't want to press charges, but I want them out of my house. Today." "Dad," Randall began, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Not now, Randall. We'll talk later, when we both calm down. Right now, I want you to leave." Donovan nodded, accepting my decision. "In that case, we can only record the incident. Mrs. Hampshire, Mr. Hampshire, Jr., I strongly advise you to leave the house as the owner requests." "This isn't over," Vanity hissed, clenching her fists. "Actually, it is," I said, suddenly feeling a surge of confidence. I've already called my lawyer, Alistair Montgomery. This morning, right after I got out of the hospital. I changed my will. That wasn't true. I hadn't had time to contact Alistair. But I was planning to do it tomorrow. And now I needed that trump card to put the matter to rest. What? Vanity froze. What will? In the old will, the house passed to Randall when I died, I explained. But that's changed now. According to the new will, the house will be sold, and the proceeds will be used to establish an engineering laboratory at St. Peter's College, the Elizabeth Hampshire Lab. I saw the pale look on Vanity's face. Everything she'd counted on, all the plans she'd made over the years, all gone in an instant. You can't do this, her voice trembled. It's Randall's inheritance, his right. Son, there is no right, Vanity. My voice sounded tired but firm. This is my house, and I have the right to use it as I see fit. After what you have done, Randall has lost his right to this inheritance. Randall was silent, looking down at the floor. I saw his shoulders slump, his whole figure expressing defeat. It pained me to look at him, my only son, my own flesh and blood. But I could not forgive the betrayal. Not now, perhaps never. I suggest you take the essentials and leave, Officer Donovan said. The rest of your belongings can be picked up later, as arranged with Mr. Hampshire. Vanity opened her mouth to object, but then, glancing at Officer Ramirez's notebook, changed her mind. Grabbing her bag, she headed for the exit. Randall hesitated as if he wanted to say something, but then just nodded and followed his wife. I watched them get into the car, a silver Lexus parked at the gate. I saw Vanity reprimand Randall angrily, and I saw him turn away, unwilling to listen. Their family life was crumbling before my eyes, and I felt a strange mixture of regret and satisfaction. Is there anything else we can do for you, Mr. Hampshire? Ramirez asked as the car rounded the corner. No, thank you, I replied. You've done more than you need to. It would be better if you changed the locks, Donovan said. Just in case. Do you have someone to stay with you tonight? You shouldn't be alone after the hospital. I shook my head. All my friends had long since left for other cities or states, many of them dead. In St. Petersburg, I had only acquaintances, but not close enough to ask for such a favor. I can handle it, I said confidently. This isn't my first heart attack, and I know how to behave. Donovan looked unconvinced, but he didn't insist. In that case, here's my card. If you need anything or have any problems, call me anytime. After walking the policeman to the door, I was finally alone in my house. The silence after they left was deafening. I slowly walked around the living room, adjusting things, putting them back where they belonged. I took Elizabeth's picture from the fireplace, the one of her standing by the sea, her hair fluttering in the wind. Her smile, frozen on film 40 years ago, seemed to say, "You did it, Eustace. You protected our home." "I miss you, Ellie," I whispered, holding the frame to my chest. "What would you do if you were me? Would you forgive Randall?" There was no answer, of course, only the ticking of the clock and the distant sound of the surf from the open window. The next morning, I called Alistair Montgomery, my longtime friend and lawyer. He arrived an hour later, listened carefully to my story, and shook his head. "They could be under the article, Eustace," he said, looking over the deeds to the house. "Changing locks without the owner's consent is serious. Are you sure you don't want to press charges?" "I'm sure," I answered. "Randall is my son, after all, and I believe he didn't know the full extent of Vanity's plans." "Perhaps," Alistair shrugged, "but he let her get this far. Anyway, let's get on with the will. Do you really want to leave the house to the college?" I nodded. "Yes, to establish an engineering lab named after Elizabeth. She always regretted that she didn't get a technical education, even though she had an aptitude for it. Let other young women get the chance she didn't have." Alistair wrote down my wishes, asked a few clarifying questions about the wording, then moved on to a more delicate subject. "What about Randall? Do you want him completely out of the will?" I wondered. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son, the only one who carried a part of me and Elizabeth in him. "No," I finally decided. "My savings and securities, everything but the house, should go to him, provided he's not married to Vanity by the time I die." Alistair raised an eyebrow, but wrote that condition down without comment. He knew me well enough to realize I was adamant on some things. After he left, I called a locksmith who replaced all the locks in the house. I gave the new keys only to Perkins Cormack, my neighbor, who called the police in case of an emergency. Randall and Vanity were permanently barred from the house. In the evening, the phone rang. Randall's number popped up on the phone screen. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I should answer. Finally, I did. Yes, Randall. Dad, his voice sounded broken. I wanted to apologize. What Vanity did, what we did, it's unforgivable. I was silent, not knowing what to say. I moved away from her, he continued after a pause. I'm staying with a friend. I think we're getting a divorce. This news caused me neither joy nor regret. It was just a statement of fact, an inevitable consequence of yesterday's events. And what will you do next? I asked neutrally. I don't know, he sounded confused. Maybe I'll leave St. Petersburg. Start over somewhere else. Too many memories here. I understand. There was another pause, longer and heavier. Dad, can you ever forgive me? I sighed. It was a question I'd been asking myself since they left. I don't know, Randall. Maybe in time, but not now. The wound is too fresh. I understand, his voice trembled. I just wanted you to know that I love you, Dad. I always have. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stand up to Vanity. Something clenched in my chest, not the pain of a heart attack, another deeper and older pain, the pain of a father seeing his child suffer. Take care of yourself, Randall, was all I could say before I hung up. I went out on the terrace with a cup of tea. The sun was setting over Tampa Bay, coloring the water a golden red. Elizabeth loved this time of day, called it her magic hour. I felt her presence near me, not as a ghost, but as part of the air, the light, the house itself. My house remained mine. I protected it, just as I had promised Elizabeth years ago when we first moved in. This will be our sanctuary, Ellie, I said then. A place where we will always be safe. I kept my promise, though the cost was my relationship with my son. Was it worth it? I didn't know. But what I did know was that no one would dare threaten me in my own home again. No one would dare try to control my life or my destiny. Even though I was 75, even though my heart had weakened, my will remained as strong as it had been in my youth. I raised my cup in a silent toast to the setting sun, to victory, to justice, to standing up for yourself, even in old age if necessary. 3 months is not a long time on the scale of a 75-year-old man's life. But for me, this spring was a time of rebirth. Every day my strength returned, my heart worked more confidently, and my mood improved along with the weather. The April Florida sun was flooding my garden, making the azaleas and jasmine bloom with unprecedented vigor. It was as if nature itself was celebrating my victory. Since that memorable evening, my house has changed. Not only did I change the locks, I installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras and motion sensors. Perkins Cormack, my neighbor on my right, helped me choose the company and oversaw the installation while I was still recovering. This rugged ex-Marine proved to be a reliable ally, silently supporting me in my confrontation with my own family. Family is supposed to protect, not destroy, he said briefly when I thanked him for his help with the police. We didn't bring it up again, but there was a silent understanding between us that only people who have experienced similar betrayals can have. I reorganized my life. Now every morning began with a half-hour walk along the bay. The cardiologist insisted on moderate exercise. Then I would have breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the view of the water and the cries of the seagulls. I had rarely allowed myself such a luxury before, just to sit and watch the colors of the sky and sea change. There were always more important things to do, people to pay attention to. Now I had learned to appreciate solitude and silence. I put the boxes of Randall and Vanity's things that they hadn't had time to pick up in the garage. Randall called several times, asking when he could come pick them up, but I always found an excuse to postpone. Not out of petty revenge, but simply because I wasn't ready to see him, to talk to him. The wounds of betrayal were slow to heal. In early June, however, the postponement became impossible. Randall called to say he was moving to Oregon, accepting a job offer at a Portland yoga studio. He needed to get his stuff before he left. Okay, I agreed after a long pause. Come back Saturday, 9 o'clock in the morning. Thanks, Dad, he sounded relieved. Yeah, not vanity, I interrupted him. I don't want to see her. Sure, he agreed quickly. We were not together anymore. The divorce was almost finalized. The news didn't surprise me. After that night, their marriage was doomed. Too many lies had come to the surface. Too many innuendos turned into open accusations. Randall had never been a fighter. He preferred to walk away from conflict rather than resolve it. No wonder he decided to start over in another state, thousands of miles away. On Saturday at 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it, ready for an awkward encounter, but saw not only Randall on the doorstep, but two of his friends with a truck. I hope you don't mind, he said, shifting nervously from foot to foot. It's a lot of stuff, and I can't do it alone. I nodded and stepped aside, letting them inside. While Randall's friends carried the boxes from the garage to the truck, my son and I stood on the porch, avoiding looking at each other. An awkward silence lingered. Sharnam, how's your health? He finally asked. Better, I answered briefly. The doctor says the recovery is going well. That's good, Randall nodded. I'm glad. There was silence again. We'd never had trouble talking before. Even when vanity came along, even when our relationship became strained, we always found topics to discuss. The weather, politics, local news. Now all those safe topics seemed empty, insignificant compared to the chasm that separated us. I wanted to apologize, Randall finally said, looking down at his hands. Not to make excuses, just to explain. I really didn't know what her plans were, how far she was willing to go. But you suspected? I asked bluntly. He wrinkled his nose as if in physical pain. Yeah, I guess I did, on some level. I just didn't want to admit it. It was easier. It was easier to believe that everything was for your own good. My good, I repeated without expression. I know it sounds awful. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from me. I was weak, Dad. Too weak to stand up to her. Too cowardly to see the truth. And now I'm paying for it. I looked at my son, at his slumped shoulders, at the wrinkles around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. He had aged over the months, gaunt. Part of me wanted to say, it's okay, son. I understand. I forgive you. But the other part, the part that still remembered his words about the house being too big for me, that I need help, that part remained wary. I hope you find what you're looking for in Oregon, I finally said. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what's needed. Randall looked up at me with hopeful eyes. So you'll forgive me someday? I sighed. That was the hardest question, the one I didn't have a clear answer to. I don't know, Randall. I understand that you were under vanity's influence. I understand that you meant no harm. But you're my son, and I expected more from you. Expected you to take my side when it really mattered. I know, he lowered his head, and I'm sorry I let you down. We stood in silence while his friends loaded the last of the boxes. When the truck was full, Randall turned to me with an uncertain smile. I'll be calling, he said. You don't mind? Call, I replied. I'll answer. It wasn't a forgiveness, but a promise not to close the door completely. Randall nodded, understanding the boundaries. He took a hesitant step forward, as if he wanted to hug me, but then stopped, hesitant to break the distance. I didn't take a step toward him either. Not now, it was too soon. As I watched the truck disappear around the corner, I had a strange feeling, a mixture of regret and relief. My son was leaving my life, perhaps forever. But with him was also leaving Vanity's shadow, her plans for my house, her cold calculations. I was master of my own destiny again. A week after Randall's departure, an event occurred that changed my measured, lonely life. I was working in the garden, pruning rose bushes, when I heard a woman's voice. Wonderful roses. Queen Elizabeth, if I'm not mistaken. I turned around and saw a woman about my age standing by the hedge separating our plots. I'd seen her before. She'd moved in next door 2 months ago, but we hadn't been introduced yet. Persephone Drake, she put her hand through the hedge. Your new neighbor on the left. I wiped my palm on my pants and shook her hand, a surprisingly firm handshake for a woman her age. Eustace, Hampshire, I introduced myself. And yes, it is indeed Queen Elizabeth. Do you know about roses? I was an avid gardener when I lived in Virginia, she smiled. But here in Florida, it's different. Different climate, different plants. You have to learn all over again. We talked about gardening, about the differences between northern and southern gardening, about local pest problems. Persephone turned out to be not just knowledgeable, but a real enthusiast. She brought some special books on Florida gardening and offered to share her experiences. My husband Harold never shared this passion, she said with a touch of sadness. He said gardening was digging in the dirt, not worthy of a serious man. My Elizabeth, on the other hand, loved the garden more than I did. I smiled at the memory. Those roses are a credit to her. I'm just maintaining what she created. Did she leave a long time ago? Persephone asked tactfully. 4 years ago. Multiple sclerosis? My Harold, 2 years. Heart. The irony is that he's been watching his health all his life and I haven't. And now he's gone and I'm still here. We stood in silence, sharing an understanding that is only possible between people who have experienced such a loss. Then she suddenly smiled, an open, bright smile that smoothed out the wrinkles around her eyes. You know what, Eustace? I was going to make lemon pie tonight, but one's too much. Would you like to share it with me? I hesitated for a second. After Randall left, the house seemed even emptier than before, and Persephone was a pleasant conversationalist without ulterior motives or pretense. I'd love to, I answered. Well, what time? 6 o'clock? I'll set up on the terrace. I have almost as good a view of the sunset as you do. That night we sat on her terrace until late at night, sharing stories of our lives. Persephone turned out to be a former professor of literature, a specialist in English poetry. She talked about Wordsworth and Keats with such enthusiasm that I, who had never been particularly interested in poetry, listened. I've always liked drawings better than poetry, I confessed. Concreteness, precise lines, measurable values. I think poetry and engineering have more in common than you might think, Persephone said thoughtfully. Both need to see structure, regularity, beauty and form. That conversation was the beginning of our friendship. We began to meet regularly, either on her terrace or in my garden. Sometimes we went shopping together or to the local library. Nothing romantic, just two lonely people finding understanding and common interests at the end of their lives. In early July, while perusing the local newspaper, I came across a short article about Randall and Vanity's divorce. The dry legal language concealed the drama that had played out over the past few months. Irreconcilable differences was the reason given for the dissolution of the marriage. I chuckled. What a delicate definition for betrayal and lies. Vanity, I learned later from Perkins, had sold her share of the real estate agency and moved to Miami. It seems the scandal of the attempted takeover of my home had not gone unnoticed in St. Petersburg business circles. Frank Porter, her father, had run into trouble too. Several major clients had canceled their contracts with him without explanation. I hadn't threatened to disclose the compromising documents, but the mere fact that they existed apparently made him nervous and made mistakes. Randall called every week from Oregon. Our conversations remained tense, but gradually grew warmer. He talked about his new job, about the yoga studio he was planning to open. I shared news about home, about my friendship with Persephone, about my improving health. We carefully avoided the subject of vanity and the events of that spring, as if by unspoken agreement. At the end of July, Persephone suggested an idea that seemed absurd to me at first. Why don't we go to Europe this fall? She asked over a cup of tea on my terrace. The weather will be great, there will be fewer tourists, and the prices will be lower. Europe, I laughed. At our age? What's the big deal? She raised an eyebrow. I'm 72, you're 75. We're both in good shape, our heads are working, we have money. If not now, when? I wondered. All my life I'd put off traveling for later. First there was work, then building a house, then Elizabeth's illness. I promised her that we would definitely go to Italy when she got better. But she didn't get better, and that promise remained unfulfilled. Where exactly do you want to go? I asked, already interested. I was thinking of northern Italy. Lakes, small towns, Venice, no rush, 2 or 3 weeks. What do you think? Italy, the country Elizabeth had longed to see. It was like a sign from above. You know, I said slowly, it's not such a bad idea. That night after Persephone left, I sat on the terrace for a long time, looking at the stars, Thoughts of the journey ahead were intertwined with memories of the past and reflections on the present. The last year had changed me more than the previous 10. I lost my son, but perhaps in time our relationship will rebuild, albeit in a new form. I have rid myself of vanity's toxic influence, her plans for my home and my life. I gained a new friendship with Persephone, unexpected and valuable. What did I lose and what did I gain in this battle? I lost illusions about my own family and gained clarity and freedom. Lost a false sense of security, gained true control over my life. A high price to pay, but in retrospect, I didn't regret my actions. Sometimes you have to lose something to find yourself. The house around me breathed peace and quiet. The home I had fought for, the home I had protected from other people's claims. But now I realized, home is not just walls and a roof, not a possession that can be valued in dollars. A home is memories, feelings, a piece of the soul embodied in wood and stone. And maybe it's time to expand the boundaries of that home a bit, to see new places, to gain new experiences, not to escape the past, but to enrich the present. I pulled out the old atlas Elizabeth and I had once studied while planning a failed trip. I opened it to a map of Italy, ran my finger along the blue line of Lake Como, along the winding canals of Venice. "We're going there after all, Ellie," I whispered. "Not exactly as we planned, but we'll go." Maybe that's the real victory, not just standing up for what's right, but finding the strength to move on, to break new ground even when everything seems predetermined by age and circumstance, to give up the role of a helpless old man that vanity and, partly, Randall tried to impose on me, to prove primarily to myself that life didn't end at 75. I closed the atlas and smiled. Tomorrow I'll call Randall, tell him about my plans for Italy. Maybe someday, when the wounds heal completely, we can even travel together. In the meantime, there's a new chapter ahead, new impressions, and that's quite a lot for a man who recently thought that all the best things in life were behind him.